Okay, Brian Bogert, welcome to Beautifully Restored. So great to have you here on my podcast today.
I'm so happy to be here, man. This is going to be fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun. So, you are a human behavior and performance coach, which totally interests me. And I can't wait to hear exactly what that is. So, tell the listening audience and me exactly what that means.
Yeah. So, the reality of it is when we look at people, when I look at high performers, when I look at the folks that I work with to help them get to the next level, so often people think that it's like the wrong strategy or tactics that are keeping them where they are. But more often what I find is that it's some element of human behavior. So an emotional trigger, a behavioral pattern, something that's blind. And so, it's those types of things that especially if we're unaware of them, they can often dictate our lives and they're going to hold us back and we may be blind to them. And so I work a lot on this idea of awareness and intentionality, which is this concept that, our minds process 11 million bits of information per second, but we're only consciously aware of about 40. So what that suggests is that we're largely led by the unconscious. So until we go through some systematic approach to move the unconscious to the conscious, the unaware to the aware, it's going to feel like life is happening to us, like life is fate, and we're going to keep ourselves on that self-defeating path. And so when I talk about human behavior, we have to address the behavioral elements of individuals, understand the history, understand the patterns that have existed in their life. And again, those emotional triggers that might spark a different type of reaction than what they authentically want. Once we get clear on that, it gets to the core of who they are. And then the what that they do can become a manifestation of the who. And so it's really about, that's how we maximize performance, right? And then the strategy and tactics layered on top of that help escalate and elevate them to another level. But if we just focus on strategy and tactics, but we don't get them out of their own way, they're going to run into the same patterns that have existed, despite whatever level of success they've had in their life.
Yeah. And we many times we get that out of order. We try to change the outside instead of, there's that great diagram with the, the outside is our procedures, our system, or no, our results. And then the middle is the systems, our habits, what we do. And the inside is our identity, the core of who we are. Like you said, becoming aware of who we are and, why we're doing what we do. And we try to change that the wrong order there. So love that. Love that you talk a lot about awareness. I want to get more into that in a little bit. How do you create awareness in your life? But first, let's learn a little bit more about you. So tell me about you. You have a family. You're training for an Ironman. So you've got some interesting things just about you.
Yeah, I definitely have some interesting things about me. I'll start with what you just said. I've got a family. I think the role that I take most, that I place at the highest category for myself is as a husband, as a father. And I'm absolutely blessed. I'm grateful every day for my wife. I way outkicked my coverage. So I feel like every morning when I wake up and she's still in bed next to me, it's like a win right out of the gate. And then awesome. She gave my kids a fighting chance of being both attractive and intelligent. So I'm forever indebted in the gift she gave me and our children because they're just incredible. So on the personal side, I'll come full circle to a couple of the things you hit, but I'm going to just ask anybody who's watching or listening to this to just close your eyes for a second, unless you're driving, because I don't want you to close your eyes while you're driving.
Yes, please.
I don't want you to imagine walking out of a store after a successful shopping trip and walking to your car, turning your head and seeing a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. You can open your eyes now. That's where this portion of my story begins. My mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And as we were headed back to our car, I'm sure in the last couple of minutes, even just listening to me, you can probably tell that, I've always had a high level of energy and I've always had like this excitement and vigor for life. So of course I was the first one to the car, right? I wanted to get home and put that 1-inch paintbrush to use.
I don't think you said how old you were in this story.
I was 7 at the time.
Okay,
yeah,
7 years old.
And so we were getting to the car, and this was back in the days before we had key fobs. So I had to literally wait for my mom to catch up, stick the key in the door and turn it so I could get in. And as I was waiting there for her to catch up, there was a truck that pulled up in front of the store, parked, and the driver and middle passenger got out. Passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, and he moved over to put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up onto the steering wheel, up onto the dashboard, and before you know it, he's catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at us with no time to react.
Oh my God.
Now we were parked in an end spot. So he went up and over the median, went up and over the tree in the median, hit our car, knocked me over, ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and then continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body. So there I am, laying in the parking lot, 115-degree day in Phoenix, Arizona. My mom and brother just watched this whole thing. My arm is 10 feet away, but lucky for me, my guardian angel was also watching. there was a nurse that walked out of the store right when this happened, and she saw the literal life and limb scenario in front of her. So she rushed immediately into action. She came over and she stopped the bleeding on the wound, and she instructed some bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, fill it with ice, and get my arm on ice within minutes. So had she not done one or both of those things, Mel, I either wouldn't be here with you today, or I'd be here with you today with a cleaned up stump, right? Like, that's just the reality of it. She saved my life and my limb.
Wow.
If it was not for her fast acting. And so I know that a lot of people weren't expecting it to go there today, right? I realize that I have a very unique story. But what I've also realized in all my time of coaching and speaking is that we all have unique stories. And what's important is that we pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories, and then become intentional with how do we apply them into our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. And we also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories so that we can shorten our own curve to learning. So I'll share with you two primary lessons that I extracted from this. There's many more, but these are two that have guided a lot of my life. The first is I learned not to get stuck by what had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with it. And the second, I didn't realize until far later. The reality of it is at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I spent a lot of that time in a fog. Although I knew what was going on, although I was very aware of what was happening, I was also being guided through the process by my incredible parents. And my parents were not in a fog. You see, they looked at it and they said that the idea of their son growing up without the use of his left arm was a source of potential great suffering for them. And so they literally willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, what was tough, through unceasing medical treatments, years of physical therapy, to ultimately strengthen and heal me. And so whether it was intentional or not, what they did was they carved into me a philosophy and a way of living, which was to embrace pain, to avoid suffering. And when this is done right, this is where people also gain freedom. So it's this same concept that I've used to not only overcome this unique injury, but how my business partners and I scaled our last business from $250,000 to over 15 million within the span of a decade. And how I flipped that on its head as a human behavior and performance coach to help hundreds of individuals and organizations just like you and our audience become more aware, more intentional, and who they already are, their most authentic selves. And I believe that when this happens, it's when the door starts to crack for perspective, motivation, and direction, and where the ability to have joy, freedom, and fulfillment exist in multiple areas of our life starts to come in. And so, yes, I'm a dad, I'm a father, I'm a human behavior coach and speaker, right? I also like to push myself to the limits because I think that's where we know what we're really capable of. And so I'm currently training for an Ironman. We can unpack that a little bit through this because that's bigger than me. I'm only doing it because there's going to have a greater impact as a result of it. And the focus that I'm on right now is to impact 1 billion lives in the next 25 years. Because I believe if we can reduce the amount of suffering in this world, that's where joy, freedom, and fulfillment can exist.
I want to highlight what you said, embrace the pain to avoid suffering. It's a really great way of putting that. It makes a lot of sense. I've never heard it said that way. So you're doing an Ironman. Is it your first Ironman?
Yes, it is.
It is your first Ironman. Is this probably, besides the accident that you went through, would this be probably the most physical pain you're going to put yourself through to endure?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of insane stuff, but the idea of swimming 2.4 miles, followed by a 112-mile bike, followed by a full marathon afterwards, right? And the average times are anywhere between 10 and 14 hours of nonstop physical activity. Yeah, this is going to push me beyond limits. I mean, like I said, I've done crazy endurance type stuff in the past, but not at this level. And, the part that's crazy for me is with Ironman, there's less than 400,000 people on the planet who've ever completed an Ironman, right? That's like a small amount. I didn't realize it until I got into it. And it's like, okay, so I'm going to be pushing myself, into a very elite group. And I think it's one of those things that the physical piece, if you've got 70 to 80% base there, it's, most of this event from what I've heard from everybody. And I've got a buddy who's a 12-time Ironman. He's going to be completing his 13th alongside me for my first.
Oh, nice.
It becomes mental, right? It becomes mental.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. You must be a fan of David Goggins. I'm sure. Do you follow David Goggins?
I am. I loved his book, Can't Hurt Me. What I'll tell you is, had I read that book 10 years ago, I would have been in 100% alignment with every single philosophy.
Okay.
The part that, and I don't mean this with any disrespect to Goggins, because the guy is an incredible human being, right? But when I read the book, the part that he brought in at the very end was just a little glimmer of the importance of rest and recovery, and the importance of having that downtime as well as pushing yourself to the limit. The first 90% of the book, like, it was just push. And by the way, that's how I used to live my life, right? My definition used to literally be stress, equals growth. And now and after I crashed and burned and paid for that flawed philosophy, right? It's now stress plus rest equals growth. And so that's the one piece that I don't think I'm in 100% alignment with him on, but Goggins is incredible. That book was incredible. His content's incredible. And I think he really challenges for many people what we're actually capable of. So with this idea of like helping people live beyond their boundaries, live with no limits, right? Like Goggins is an incredible role model for that. So
yeah, I want you to talk more about this living, with no limits and overcoming what is your limit. Because, I mean, would you say that most people's biggest issue with achieving what they want to achieve is that they have self-limiting doubts? I mean, as a coach, that's what I see a lot of myself. What would you say about that? And talk to us about living a no limit type life.
Yeah. So, the reality of it is that, and I want to give some clarification here, because there are certain limitations that just exist, right? So I want to at least acknowledge that out of the gate, because I don't want people to think like, I can't go be a professional basketball player, right? I can't go play professional football. Like, I don't have the physical gifts that require me to be able to do that, right? That's not what it's about. So it's not about saying that anybody can do anything. That's not no limits living. So I want to start with that. No limits living is living beyond whatever limits we or the world place upon ourselves, and doing it in a way where we're in alignment, in a way that it can be self-regulating in our lives, and in a way where it allows us to fulfill and become the best versions of ourselves. That's what no limits living is. And so I would 100% agree with you. I think that most often what keeps people stuck or in that one place or not being able to push past their limits is some combination of self-limiting beliefs or the beliefs that have been layered on top of them. Right. So I'm going to unpack one word right now, because I think it's something that really limits a lot of people. Not always, but it's a big one. I am like on a mission to remove the word should from our language, because should automatically implies that whatever you're doing isn't good enough. Right. So as kids, we're born as like the most raw, authentic version of who we are. We literally we literally come out perfect for who we are. And then as parents, teachers, coaches, mentors, right, like employers, we start like funneling people down this path saying, well, no, you should do this. You shouldn't do that. You should be this. You should chase this career. You should be this way in how you show up in the world. You should operate this way in group environments. And we literally start funneling people down into this box that the world can accept. Mm-hmm. So limiting beliefs can be truly self-limiting inside, but a lot of those things are also conditioned within us. Yeah. And so what happens is if we go outside of that box, we feel like we're not going to be accepted. We're not going to be loved. We're not going to be understood. We're not going to be, right, like graced by the connection that we so deeply desire. And so what do? We try to mold ourselves into this box so we can fit in and be accepted. Right. Yeah. And so there's a huge shame piece that's in that. And I would tell you that if we look at it through that lens, that limits us because we're in a box. We're literally in a box. So when we think about breaking beyond boundaries, when you look at the people who live a no limits life, there is no box. They show up as 100% authentically who they are. So a lot of what I do, I told you, it's about unpacking. I love your kitty cat.
I'm glad somebody does.
My wife would be losing it right now. We had an orange tabby for 14 years and we just had to put him down not that long ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But that's the reality, is like people operate in this box. And so then the way we think and the way we emotionally process things is we're in this box. So I'm often trying to help people remove the box, right? Shed the layers of what the world put on it.
How do they do it? How do you help people do that?
Helping them see themselves more clearly in a way that they haven't before, right?
Okay.
So that they can really live beyond limits. So, I'll give a couple of examples. I'm working with a 68-year-old man right now. I love the fact that he's 68. He doesn't need to work. He's been successful. He's a coach and consultant himself, and he's still investing in himself. So we've been working together now for a short period of time, but he's wanting to become the best version of himself for however long he has got left. 30 years, 40 years, 20 years, whatever that is. He's like, I want to continue to invest in myself. And within 2 sessions, we found that there is a very deeply rooted self-worth issue that has impacted his relationships. It's impacted his ability to monetize his business. It's impacted his ability to work with his business partner who wants to just give services away for free at the point that it almost hurts their business, right? Like, it's literally impacted so many elements of who he is, even to the point that, like, he's got a fear of missing out. And it's like one of those things where if he sees groups of people, he automatically just shames himself and puts himself in this box because he's not worthy to fit in. 68 years old, he never saw that pattern. And I'm not saying that to be like, oh, Brian's amazing, right? But he literally said, I've worked with 5 or 6 coaches who've worked on strategy and tactics multiple times that have helped me. I've never had somebody see me the way that you see me.
Did you recognize that in him and see that and kind of pull that out? You know, did you see that, like, this guy's got a self-worth problem?
Yeah,
So
it was
you
pretty. Now that's one of my gifts, is that I see people very clearly. I've got a high level of emotional intelligence, and part of my accident, I think, honed that, because I didn't want the attention on me. So I really learned group dynamics. I really understood human behavior from a very early age, and then I've been studying it for 15 plus years. So I can see those things. But yeah, with him, it was like all of a sudden, because I saw him that way, he saw himself more clearly. And he's already started changing the way that they set up contracts with their clients. He's already had conversations with his business partner around what they're willing and willing not to do in this next year and how they're going to go about building this. He's already shown up differently with his relationships, right? And so again, it started with awareness. I had to bring that into his level of conscious awareness so that we can then be intentional about it, right? So the process of how I do that is different for almost everybody, but it almost always starts with me getting a very clear understanding of who this person is. The things that have happened in their lives, those moments that have shaped them, the moments that they've been most successful, their biggest hurdles, their fears, their emotions, their understandings, their family dynamics. If I don't have that full context, I can give them strategy and tactics to help their business, but strategy and tactics isn't the issue. It's they're in their own way. You know, I've got another client I'm working with right now. He moved like 28 times before the time he was 16, was constantly shuffled back and forth between his parents' house, right? He never knew how to give or receive love. What he desires most in this world is a connection with his wife and his daughters. But he also has not allowed himself to be vulnerable and show up in a way that allows him to actually connect with his wife and his daughters. He's not the man that he knows he wants to be. And so we're able to help unpack for him, right? One of the steps around this embrace pain, avoid suffering. We didn't talk about the concept. We can come back to it in a second. But the very first step is to acknowledge the suffering you wish to avoid. For him, acknowledging the suffering he wishes to avoid is losing his wife and his daughters. That sounds bad for him, but being alone and isolated, right? That's the suffering he wishes to avoid. Now, the contrary to acknowledging the suffering we wish to avoid is to get really clear on what we want. And so for him, that's a very clear, vivid image of him, his wife and him having a ranch, sitting out on 80, 90, 100 acres. And the only thing breaking the silence of the nature is his daughters and his grandkids laughing in the background and playing in the fields and having those joyous moments 40 years from now, right? When he locks that into his memory, when he burns that into his soul, the purpose becomes big enough to overtake the pain necessary to invest the time and energy to change who he is and how he shows up in the most important relationships in his world. For him to learn how to receive love, for him to learn how to give love, for him to really understand what human connection is about, because the first 20 years of his life, he didn't know what connection was. Moving 28 times, shuffling back and forth between households, having different friends like every couple of months, having to reestablish, constantly show up and feel like you're getting into a groove and then the rug gets pulled out from under you, right? What do you do in that scenario? You bottle up and you protect yourself, especially from the ones closest to you, because whether it's true or not, those are the ones that often can provide you the most pain, right? And so all of a sudden, you've got to start dropping that shield that he's been carrying around with him for his entire life, which has been viewed as armor, but the weight of that armor was crushing him, right? When we really look at like, how do we help people become free? A lot of that is we got to remove those layers. We got to shed the layers. We got to drop the armor. We have to start to be able to show up so that we can live no limits in alignment with who we are.
That is complete fire. If I had like fire emojis, I'd be throwing them right now. That is so good. It's funny, I'm over here kind of scrambling and writing some notes, and I'm just telling myself, you're gonna have to watch this later, Melissa, so you can take full notes on everything you're learning. I love that, to first acknowledge the suffering that you're trying to avoid, that you don't want, that fear of what you don't want to happen, and then get clear on what you do want. That's awesome. That goes to the embrace pain to avoid suffering concept. Is there anything else that's tied to that besides those two?
Yeah, there's two other steps. Let me unpack the concept first, because we didn't do that. So I want people to understand what this is. You know, the world literally tells us to reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain, right? I mean, there's pain medications. There's all these things. We're always looking for the quick fix to not have to deal with it. And I'm just telling you, the world is wrong. right? That was an evolutionary response to literally help us survive. But in the world that we live in today, we don't have to go down that path. We have to understand what pain and suffering are, right? So many of us like start with this idea of we don't want to really lean into either one of those concepts because pain and suffering sound horrible, right? But we need to understand what they are. Pain, right, is literally defined as short-term, intermittent, a direct cause from something and healed once that direct cause is removed. And what we tend to do is we'll further clarify it with adjectives like acute and chronic because it makes us feel better. It all fits into the same category, right? Mm-hmm. Acute maintains the definition, but chronic changes it because chronic implies that it lasts beyond the direct cause being removed, that it doesn't heal, that it persists longer than short term. So what I want people to start to recognize is that's not chronic pain, that is suffering. We don't want to admit that suffering exists, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices. And what's interesting is often we grow numb to suffering over time because it just incrementally increases into our life up until the point where all of a sudden when it hits us, sometimes it's too late and we can't reverse the impact. And so what I really want people to understand is that, you know, we all must choose our pain or our suffering will choose us. And so I'll give you a couple of examples on this, right? We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a spouse or loved one to avoid the suffering of our marriage ending in divorce, or frankly, being stuck in a marriage if we actually want divorce, right? We can embrace the pain as a business owner of firing our top salesperson to avoid the suffering of losing all of our other top talent and having stagnant growth because that person was the biggest cancer in our culture. And this goes on in everything in our life. That's awesome. So we have to really understand, like, how do we actually start to bring this in? Now, acknowledging the suffering that we wish to avoid is the first step. The second is to identify the pains that we tend to avoid and learn to embrace them. Because my goal here is not to put us into an unnecessary amounts of a pain, but to identify the proper pains on our path to success. So I'll use a personal example on this one because it's a great one that people can identify with, right? I don't have a tricep. My bicep is my gracilis from my leg. I don't have a lat in the left side of my back. I have literally a curve in my spine because of the muscular imbalance in my body. And the older I got, I started getting into my early 20s. And although I was physically active, I started actually having my pain turn into suffering to the point that it was debilitating. Like legitimately debilitating. I was early 20s. And then I started to realize, look, if I really focus on core strength, I eat the right foods and I stay lean, that suffering becomes a manageable pain, right? It's not debilitating. I can operate, I can show up in the world to the point where I don't even notice it. But what did I have to do around that, right? I was in my early 20s. I did what most people would do. I went and I joined a gym. And I went consistently for about 30 days. And then I stopped going. And I could have stopped there and been like, oh, well, I just don't like working out, or I don't like to do those things. But I had to ask myself the question, is it the pain of working out that I'm avoiding? Or is it the anxiety I get when I go to the crowded gym? For me, it was definitively the second. I love physical movement. I love working out. I love pushing myself. That wasn't my environment for success. So I had to embrace the pain of creating the time, space, money to build out a home gym at my house so that I can operate in an environment that I can do what I need to do to avoid the suffering of my back pain. Mm-hmm. The third step is to establish this as a habit in everything that we do, right? And what we know from experts in habit formation is that there's an upfront energy tax to any new thing we add into our lives. I said tax intentionally because that's how we often view these things. It's like, well, if I'm going to go work out, if I'm going to, have this difficult conversation with a spouse, if I'm going to fire my top salesperson, if I'm going to embrace the pain of picking up that 500-pound telephone to, avoid the suffering of making sure that I have the right pipeline to fulfill my business, right? If we go down this path and we start looking at these and we actually view it as a cost, I want people to stop viewing it as a cost and view it instead as an investment in your future self. Because when you realize that these are the things that are going to be essential to helping you become the best version of yourself, essential to helping you become who you already are, and essential for helping you live a no limits, aligned, self-regulating life, right? Until we start to move to that place where we realize it's an investment in who we could be, we're just going to remain stuck. So when we put those three things together, we start to notice people really start to break free of the shackles that have been placed on them for the first part of their life.
It's very, very powerful. So much of that was, about perspective too, and the perspective that we have. And you've got a great perspective about the pain that you've been through and, what you've learned from that. What would you say, what are your top three strengths? And would you say that they come from, the pain and the suffering that you've been through?
What's interesting is I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question outside of like an interview early in my career. You're going to cause me to pause for a second. Now, one thing I know definitively that one of my gifts and one of my strengths is my ability to read people. And then how I pair that to be able to actually give them a clearer view of who they are to identify the appropriate steps for them. Right.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely one of them, because I'm not one of those guys that's like a one size fits all coaching program. We have similar philosophies to unpack stuff, but what works for you, Mel, is not what's going to work for me, is not going to work for anybody else. Like, we've got to really get to the root of that person. So that's definitively one of it. And I remember from early on, that's one of my abilities. I think that my other strength probably was actually deeply ingrained in who I was, but the perspective helped hone it, is my ability to push through and get to where I want to be. And so the reason I say this happened before my accident, but it was honed by it. I was one of those guys that, and I don't say this to impress, I say it to impress on the point. I mean, I told my dad, I remember I was speaking in full sentences at 18 months. And at 2.5 years, I went to my dad and I said, I want you to take the training wheels off my bike. I was on one of those little 12-inch bikes. And he's like, you might crash, you might fall. I was like, yeah, I'm good. Like, take them off. And so, I was fortunate that my parents always gave me some latitude to test stuff and fail, right? Because I think we learn more from our failures. Well, he took the training wheels off and I got on the bike and I rode it. Right. Like, and again, I don't say that to impress. I say that to impress on the point that I think I've always had a really strong ability to like recognize potential failures and just push through anyway. And I've done that a big part of my life. And my accident helped hone that to a crazy level, which is where this idea of embrace pain to avoid suffering came from, where this idea of learning not to get stuck by what has happened to me, but getting moved by what I could do with it. Like, that gives me a whole lot of perspective. And then I would say that probably my other strength is, and I don't know the right word to say this, but I would say that it's like my genuine care for other people. And you could call it sympathy, you could call it empathy, but like, I genuinely see the best in people, and I care at a deep level, to the point that, sometimes even little interactions with folks, when I know that I've got the right intent, or like we can approach stuff, if it's not received or they're not in a place to do it, like it does irk at me if I can't really help somebody. And so I will turn down business opportunities. I'll turn down interactions if I don't think I can have like a real profound impact. I won't do it, because it's not for the right reasons, because I care so deeply. Hence why I'm committing, the rest of my life to impacting 1 billion lives, I guess. I really genuinely want to see our society be in a better place and focus on human connection and have people see who they are. So
those 3 strengths, no doubt, are what make you a coach and make you a really good coach, that you bring a lot of value. You've got a Bogert bullets. Do you want to tell the listeners about what Bogert bullets are? Those are kind of cool. Are they like just little snaps of wisdom from you, or what would you say that is?
I don't know if it's wisdom or just like free flowing thought, or, me just getting on rants or whatever you want to call it. But they're 3 to 5 minute topical videos. And, I think I'm on I just released episode 71 this morning.
Nice.
But when I first started my business, this was 5.5 years ago, I just thought it was kind of a cool way to speak to people and put some content out. And I did, I think, 44 or 45 episodes consistently week to week. And it was just a lot of fun to do. They had a whole lot more structure early on. I actually did more prep. It was like a completely different approach than it was today. And, I got feedback from people who didn't know me, and they were like, oh yeah, the content's great. Like, these videos are awesome. But the people who knew me or who had seen me speak on stage were like, it's just not the same. Right. And and when I look back on them, like, they were right. I mean, I was like fabricating energy. I was like forcing stuff. I was like screaming at the camera. Like, it wasn't like me in the most authentic way. So the content was good. The delivery was okay.
Yeah.
But it wasn't me. And so I stopped doing them actually for a couple of years, because I had to figure out how to calibrate that. Because again, if I'm all about helping people be who they are, right, the last thing I want is anything that's not 100% who I am. And so they're still up there. People can go watch them. And the reason I left them up, because it was a part of who I was at the time. And it also shows the process and the development through that. Now I release them once a week again, have been for a few months. Okay. And I feel like I finally found that calibrating point on making sure that they were representing who I am. Like, if somebody watches a video, they're probably going to feel the same way as if we were on a podcast or I met them in person. And that's the feedback I've been getting. Now, though, there's almost no structure, meaning I feel a moment of inspiration. I turn the camera on and I just talk for 3 to 5 minutes on what it is. And then I kind of wrap it at the end with typically a call to action. That's probably the only element of structure, is the intro that talks about the topic and the close at the very end. Everything in the middle, I don't know what I'm going to say until the camera's rolling.
Wow.
And so I just feel inspiration, and I've learned to just let that flow, because that's where it comes out raw and authentic for me.
I love that. And that's hard to do. As someone who creates content, it is very hard sometimes just to get on, not knowing exactly where it's going to go and just let it flow. But those are usually the most valuable that people get so much from. I'm assuming that someone at your level, and as you just really you've got your life together, it seems you probably have a pretty strong daily routine, maybe a strong morning routine. What's the most important part of that for you? What's the most crucial of that routine?
Oh, my morning routine, hands down, no doubt. I do have a regimented routine. I'm not one of those, though. I think there's a difference in morning routine. I look at it more in the things that I have to accomplish versus like having it predetermined by 15-minute slots of my day. So I'm very organized and disciplined, but like my routine can vary slightly, and I allow that to ebb and flow where it needs to. But I would tell you that, most days, when everything is set up and appropriate and travel's not impacting things, or life isn't getting in the way, I have a pretty regimented 2.5 hour morning routine. And my 2.5 hour morning routine hits on the 4 categories that I believe are most important to helping me be the best version of myself, which is mental, spiritual, physical, and emotional. And so I get up almost every day between 3:30 and 4. Most days I wake up without an alarm, because that's just now how my body clock is calibrated. I didn't this morning for obvious reasons, based on what I told you about this weekend, right?
Yes.
But
that's really early. Okay.
Yeah, but I'll tell you my philosophy on that. The reason my morning is the most important, and the reason I get up that early, is because it's the only time of day that I have 100% control of my time. And if I get up that early, it's also the only time of day that nobody needs anything from me, because most people are still sleeping.
Yeah, it's middle of the night, Brian. So pretty much, yeah.
I know it sounds crazy, and I'm not. And again, by the way, I also get 7 hours of sleep almost every single night, 6.5 to 7. So I'm not one of those. I used to only sleep 4, right? And I used to be like, oh, like I'll sleep when I'm dead. That used, again, stress equals growth. That used to be my philosophy. Now, like I've learned, like I'm regimented in my sleep. And so despite getting up early, I also go to bed at 9 almost every night, right?
Nice.
And so, but that's the only time of day. My wife's not awake. My kids aren't awake. My clients aren't emailing or calling me. Like there's literally nobody who needs anything from me. And so it's the most selfish part of my day, but it's also the least selfish thing I can do, because that's what allows me to be there for everybody else once the world starts waking up. Very first thing I do, I literally get out of bed. I'm blessed because I've got a detached casita at our house. I've got basically 2 rooms that are 100% dedicated to my space, which I've built out and done that. So it's a 600 square foot spot. Half of it is my gym and half of it is my office and virtual studio. So it's 100% my space, which I'm big on having environments for success, controlling the things that we can control. So I roll out here, get away from everybody else. And the very first thing I do, I don't even turn on lights or anything. I roll straight from sleep into a 30-minute meditation. And I've got a meditation chair that I sit in. It's the same spot. It's the same consistent place. And I honor what I need in that day. So I allocate 30 minutes. Sometimes it takes 15, sometimes it takes 20, sometimes it takes the full 30, and then the alarm goes off. But that helps me just really calibrate and transition from the memory consolidation, stage 3 REM sleep, to more of like the concentration, meditation, visualization process, so that I can really get my day cleared and focused and centered. The next thing I do immediately after that is my body work. And what I mean by body work is literally stretching and like percussion therapy. So because of where my body's at and the level that I push it to, if I don't stretch, I take 45 minutes to an hour almost every day to do that alone. Because that's what allows me to kind of maintain at the level that I need to, and make sure that I just don't turn into a rigid board, because that's what I will do if I don't, right? And I immediately follow that with my physical whatever I'm doing. So I'm training for an Ironman right now. So at the moment, that's pretty much exclusively set on either riding my bike, running, or swimming. And I do that 6 days a week, physical activity. I take 1 day a week off from that. And so I'll push there. And I also use that if I'm running or biking. That's also where I start funneling knowledge into my head. I don't listen to music. I listen to books or podcasts to be able to make sure that I'm not only pushing myself physically, but mentally in those times. And then the last thing I do is when I get back, before I like go wrap up my day, is I typically spend 30 minutes calibrating for my day. So figuring out like what are the top 3 things I have to accomplish today. I've often reflected on that already from the night before, getting myself organized for where I need to roll in, connecting with my team to help them run in the direction they need to. And then typically by 8:30, I typically don't start much like with my professional day before 8 or 8:30. Most days then I'm jumping into coaching, virtual talks, podcasts, content creation, and kind of running my business. That's where it ebbs and flows. I've got a pretty consistent block of time. Most days I shut off by 5 or 5:30. So I can go in, and that's where I get my intentional time with my family. I've got typically 90 minutes to 2 hours where we do dinner and bedtime. So at least 6 nights a week, most of the time, 7 nights a week, I'm having dinner with my family and putting my kids to bed with my wife. And we've established a routine over the last 7 years where we trade off nights of putting them to bed, meaning like we both put them to bed, but we trade off kids. So I'll cuddle with one kid one night, cuddle with the next kid the next night. And it's just like a really meaningful part of the day. And then I often will take the next hour and wrap up my day professionally, get back to messages that I need to, coordinate with my team, and then I shut off. And that last hour is typically time that I spend with my wife. And then my head hits the pillow at 9, and I typically rinse and repeat. So that's a little feeling to my day. But the most important is hands down my morning routine, because that's what allows me to be able to do all the stuff I do.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not surprised to hear that. I figured that's what you would tell me. But I was interested to hear that. My morning routine is really important to me too. You've got me now wanting to build out my own sacred space. I love that idea that you like built your own. And you could hear my dog like feet scurrying, chasing the cat here a minute ago. I need to build a place like that where I can go where there's no animals. And,
yeah. What are they calling that now too? Like you could build yourself a she shed.
A she shed, yes. I knew a she shed. I love that. That's so awesome. What's your favorite book? What's been the most influential book in your life? Is there one?
So there's a few. Now you can see I've got a few of them on the shelf behind me. Almost every one of those are some of my favorites.
Okay, yeah.
I'm trying to see if there's honestly, the one that I think I'm connecting with most right now, it was one of the most transformational books for me, was Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. I never realized until a few years ago the role that shame played in my life, and the biggest reason for that, and this book helps outline it, and a lot of her content does, is that shame has 2 talk tracks. The first is I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. All of us have lived there at some point, but that's not been like the predominant area for me. I've typically not struggled with self-worth moments, right? Sure. But the other side of that, as she outlines, is when people shut this down and they show up in the arena and they're ready to go to battle, it's who do you think you are, right? And so everything major I've ever done in my life, up until the point where I started to unpack shame, I felt the need to apologize for. And I had to unpack that. I know the root, I know the patterns, I know exactly where that is. But I literally, when I talk about this box, I literally lived in this box. And that's the hard part about shame. It's, the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing, because it hits you on both sides. It's either I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough. Or if you're ready to go do something big, it checks you down on the backside. Who do you think you are, right? Like, who are you going to go show up and do that stuff? And so that has to be one of the most transformational books for my life, because me understanding that concept literally unbridled me to be able to go do what I need to do to focus on impact.
Wow, I haven't read that book, so that's on my list now. And did you unpack that kind of that depth yourself, or did you have a coach? What helped you do that?
I have multiple coaches. I have over the course of the last 7 years. So right now I actively have 2 business coaches. I also have a counselor that we see both individually and in marriage. We've been investing in our marriage from that standpoint for the last few years. I wish we would have done it right out of the gate when we first got married. But nice. I'm going to say shame on me, even though I just said I'm trying to get shame out of my life. Shame on me. I was the one that was resistant to it for so long. Okay. But we've been seeing them consistently for 3 to 4 years. My wife, I have a meditation coach. I have a Reiki energy healer. So I mean, I go deep on investing in myself. And because look, here's the thing: had I not had those outside influences to help bring shame to the table as something for me to evaluate, I would not have been able to unpack it. So I unpacked most of the work to get me to where I am myself, but I didn't see the shame. It was these outside lenses that helped me see that in myself. So I'm really good at seeing it in other people, and I'm very self-aware, but we all have blind spots, which is why I have so many coaches in my life, because that's how I see the most full picture of who I am and the areas that I can improve.
Yeah, coaches no doubt help create awareness in the client. A good coach does. That's one of the biggest things that I think that they're so valuable to have. And even coaches need coaches. So, I say that all the time, even coaches need coaches.
Yeah.
But before we close, Brian, what would you want people that are listening to this today, maybe hearing you for the first time, what would you want them to walk away with more than anything?
I got goosebumps when you asked that question, because there is something right now that I've been playing with this idea on. I've shared it, I think, only one other time, and I did have a Bogert's Bullets on it. But it's this idea that all of us have the ability to be our own savior. I think so many of us, and the way that the world conditions us, it's often to put ourselves, and I hate to use this term in this example, but it's the only one that fits. It's almost like we put ourselves into a victim mentality. Life is happening to us, right? Like horrible economy, global pandemic, like all these, my dad beat me when I was growing up. Like, by the way, I just made that up. My dad didn't beat me. And I don't mean to make a joke about that, but that was an example I was trying to give.
Sure.
Reality of it is, it's like all these things that people like look externally for and place blame on, when in reality, and this is the core of my coaching as well, like until we do the intrinsic work, and until we take ownership and accountability for what we have and what we do, we can't actually be the ones to stand ourselves back up and be our own savior. But we all have that ability. And so it starts with awareness, right? We talked about it before. It's like, if we aren't aware of what's happening, it's going to feel like life is happening to us and like it's fate. And like we need somebody else or the world to save us. I'm here to tell you, nobody's going to save you, right? You're going to have people on your path that can help you, right? Who can pull you up, who can give you a kick in the ass if you need it, but you're the only person that can save you. So I want everybody to leave today knowing that they can and will be their own savior. And if they don't know how to do it, there's plenty of people on this planet that can help you learn how to do it yourself.
Amazing and extremely powerful. And like you said, they can help you, but in the end, it is up to you. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you, Brian, for this amazing conversation that I got so much out of myself, and I know that it will be a help to so many people. So you are an inspiration. You are awesome, and I appreciate you. I'm excited to learn more about you and watch you on your journey of the Ironman. Is there a date set for that?
April 24th, I think.
Okay.
It's 24th or 26th. It's somewhere in there. It's Woodlands, Texas. So it's Ironman, Texas. Fingers crossed it doesn't get canceled or delayed, because so many of them have over the course of this last year. But I'm training for it as if it's on, no matter what. And if it gets delayed, I'll do another one. Awesome. So yeah, it's gonna be a fun journey. Thank you for having me on. More importantly, thank you for building this platform to put good into the world, and thank you for being who you are. It's been fun getting to know you over the last month and a half ish, watching your journey, watching some of your content, seeing what you're up to, and you've just had like an epic year. And so I thank you, because people who live like you do show others what's possible.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you so much. Brian, where can we find you before we close this out? Where can people find you?
Yep. So brianbogert.com is probably the easiest place. It's got everything in there. It's got Bogert's Bullets. It's got all my social handles. It has a lot of the publications that have been published in Forbes and others. So a lot of the content that's out there. Reality of it is, like I told you, I'm trying to impact 1 billion lives, and I am very aware that 99.9999999% of those will never pay me $1. So I create a lot of free content and put it out into the world for that reason. And so to extend on that, I do have a free resource for anybody who's listening that's interested in any of these concepts. Go to nolimitsprelude.com. Whether you know exactly who you are, or you have no idea where to start, or you're somewhere in between, this will be a valuable resource for you, and it's completely free. So nolimitsprelude.com. Hopefully it'll help you get back on the path to living a no limits life, becoming who you are, and being able to be your own savior. Love it. Thanks again, Brian. You're awesome. Take care. Good luck in the Ironman, and we'll talk more later. Thank you.